Welcome to week 2 of my podcast, A Mathematician Goes Birding. This podcast is about my thoughts on society and my thoughts on ecology, which were mainly brought about by my transition from being a mathematician in academia to a birder. In this episode, I'm going to be talking about something I call the lie of STEM. What is STEM exactly? STEM is an acronym, and it stands for Science, Technology, Engineering, and Mathematics. STEM is an acronym that's frequently used to describe research fields or jobs such as biologist, chemist, programmer, anything that falls under those 4 different topics. So what is the lie of STEM? I recently saw a post on the internet by Australia's CSIRO, which is a research organization funded by the government of Australia, and they said, "With STEM, you can help create the future you want to see. Our global future depends on young people embracing science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, STEM, and we're here for it." This statement is one of very many that embodies what I like to call the lie of STEM. So what is the lie of STEM? The lie of STEM is basically that STEM is primarily for improving the future, for improving the world that we live on. And this message is something that I see repeated again and again, especially to young people going into STEM fields. And I would like to talk a little bit about why I think this is an absolute deception and a total lie, essentially. And so that's why I call it the lie of STEM. Now, it's important to say that I'm not saying that STEM is all bad or harmful. There are several fields like the study of ecology of animals and many other parts of biology that are probably going to be necessary for us to live more harmoniously with this planet. What I am saying is that the majority of STEM or the nature of STEM is more subtle, and in fact, most of it is not about improving the future, and it's not about making the world a better place. Well, of course we should define what a better world is, and many people may have different definitions of what a better world is, but at the very minimum, I'd say that a better world is simply one in which we can live comfortably within our planet, and in which we can live harmoniously with plants and animals and keep our biosphere stable by not endangering other forms of life. So, we're definitely not there yet. And in fact, many things are getting worse. Many things are spiraling out of control. So with this definition, I am saying that as a general rule, most pursuits in STEM, especially in technology, are not about improving the world at all. As a bit of a background, I'd say that I'm very familiar with STEM. I got my PhD in mathematics at McGill University in 2016, and I've published several papers. I no longer practice mathematics professionally, but I still enjoy it as a form of artistic expression. I do love math, and I want to emphasize that this is not some sort of emotional rant against science and technology, but rather it is something I've been thinking about for a very long time. So basically, while I think many problems in STEM are fascinating, I also believe we need a much more balanced approach and a different philosophy when we're carrying out STEM research, because right now, I believe that on average, STEM can actually be making the world worse. So let's get back to the question. What is the lie of STEM? Why is STEM not about improving the world in general? Well, most areas of STEM have a common mechanism. These areas are comprised of institutions designed to churn out as much knowledge and invention as possible. Not only that, but the knowledge created by STEM is exceptionally powerful. We have the ability to modify our genome and even more recently, create advanced artificial intelligence that is growing more sophisticated by the day. Basically, STEM is a giant machine that produces as much knowledge as possible. How we practice knowledge acquisition as a species sort of comes down to our instincts. I think you can understand this through an evolutionary lens. We do have the tendency to collect as much new information as possible and remember as much as possible. I think this makes a lot of sense because these instincts or tendencies were no doubt adaptive in our distant past, but have become quite maladaptive now. You can see these effects in modern society. Our instinct to collect as much new information has created science and technology, and our instinct to remember is readily apparent in how much we store in terms of endless photos and endless information on huge data centers costing billions of dollars in total. The problem with this is that the discoveries in STEM, especially in the technology field, but also in sciences, are primarily motivated by money. They're motivated by short-term gains at the cost of long-term consequences. Moreover, there are simply no ethical guidelines in the usage of STEM knowledge. Today, the modus operandi is everything that can be discovered should be. If you get a STEM degree, you will find zero mention of the ethical uses of science and technology. I've never once seen any mention of the ethics of science or technology when I was doing my own degree. Of course, I'm not considering things like the ethical treatment of animals. That's something that we've had for a long time. But I'm talking about the ethical uses of knowledge and how that use of knowledge impacts our society. There was absolutely no mention in my entire 11 or so years of study. So what you have here is basically a kind of machine. We have a machine, the STEM machine, for generating as many discoveries as possible. Scientific careers are dependent on publishing as many new papers as possible. And yet, all of these discoveries, all of this knowledge acquisition is not at all guided by any sort of ethical framework. So how can we possibly expect for this gigantic institution to be beneficial to society? Well, of course, you might make the counterpoint or counter-argument that the researchers in STEM, the people doing the research, are probably somewhat ethical. Well, the thing is, if you go into a STEM field, you will have a very narrow range of possible research topics. Whether or not you think they can improve the world, you will have to work on them or simply not progress. So in essence, even if you think something you're doing is not entirely beneficial to humanity, you can't just simply say you're not going to do the research. Well, you can, but if you do, then likely you're not going to progress at all in the field. Also, the allure of money and fame in research is often too great to pass up. For example, if you're working in a medical field and you discover some sort of treatment that extends our lifespan by 100 years, many people are going to be willing to pay and fund that research, and likely you're going to be set for life in your career as a medical researcher. Of course, publishing such a result would be a disastrous mistake for humanity. There is pretty much zero ethical consideration in computer science. And in fact, early computer science seemed to be fairly benign, but now it is capable of creating artificial intelligence programs which are almost certainly going to be disastrous for the human race. And this is evinced by what is happening right now. You can see that almost nobody is considering the ethical implications of artificial intelligence. People who are not computer scientists are just playing with this technology, and programmers for corporations around the world are happily creating it without any ethical thought to the future, without any possible consideration that this might actually be a serious disaster for us. Even in the very unlikely chance that artificial intelligence can be controlled, these questions of whether it's dangerous or not should be asked, and very few people are asking these questions. In short, an ethical use of science will simply not emerge from the current philosophy of simply discovering as much as possible and creating as many inventions as possible, especially where the funding for these discoveries and inventions are motivated by capitalistic concerns of short-term benefits over long-term gains. So basically, we are not at all considering the long-term implications of scientific discovery. Over the past few weeks, I've asked myself why. Why don't we have more ethical conversations of the use of science? Of course, we have the obvious ones like the use of atomic energy, but I'm talking about the use of all science and the use of all technology. And I think one of the reasons is that, proximally, science and technology is motivated much more by curiosity, intellectual stimulation, and personal fame than it is by improving the world. Of course, this isn't meant to be a universal statement, only one that applies to most cases. In science, this can be understood historically. Science was once a benign discipline. It made sense to simply ask basic questions about the world around us. One can certainly make an argument that some basic knowledge can improve life, though even then, we must be careful about how to apply it. Even basic knowledge needs maturity and wisdom for its application. In technology, that is, the application of science and the application of mathematics, this can be understood through the seeking of profit and the immediate satisfaction of our short-term desires and our urge to ameliorate fears of death. Thus, for profit seekers, it makes the most sense to develop as much technology as possible in order to appeal to our primitive urges. A classic example is the car. The car promised us the ability to get from point A to point B more rapidly. If we're walking along a road and we're tired, we're going to take the option of a car, even though the long-term implications of the car is enormous amounts of pollution and enormous amounts of highways fragmenting our habitat, thereby rendering many species vulnerable or even extinct. Another classic example is plastics. After World War II, we saw an explosion of single-use plastics and disposable plastics, only because they're more convenient. Now look at the horrible problems those plastics have wreaked upon our society. Science provides the means for these inventions, and people's instincts to take the easiest route without regard for the long-term consequences provide the impetus and funding for scientific invention. If the practitioners of science and technology were truly concerned about the impact of the knowledge they create, then there would be ethical controls and discussions, serious discussions, about the possible long-term impacts of these technologies. In cases where we don't know enough yet, or we don't have the maturity to use the knowledge, or we can envision a dark or dangerous impact of certain knowledge, then I believe firmly that we should really consider whether it's worth publishing or creating this knowledge in the first place. Unfortunately, none of this is done in current science and technology. This is why I call the promise of improving the world the lie of STEM, because there is simply no mechanism in STEM to try and improve the world. The only mechanism that exists is to develop as much knowledge as possible. And I'm sure many people in science and technology have the hope that what they create will improve the world, but often this is not the case. And this is especially true in technology. Most modern technology that is developed today, such as new phone models and new electronic products, are not going to improve the world. They might amuse us for a short time, but in the end they're just going to create mountains and mountains of electronic waste. Other technologies are going to allow us to exploit the world even better. Still others, like medical technologies, will allow our population to expand even further. The main failing of STEM, the failing of science and technology, is that we have very little control over it. If one person invents something that will allow them to make a short-term profit, then that person, or at least some people, are likely to use that technology. We do have a very small amount of control over what we create, and that's why we need to impose large restrictions and considerations on what we do. In other words, it is simply human nature to want to get ahead using the best tools that we have. And that human nature will be our destruction if we do not take the development of advanced technology more seriously. With every new development, we must tell ourselves the following. Yes, science has provided us with a solution, but what are the side effects of that solution? Science has provided us with effective use of fossil fuels, but decades later, we are in a precarious state of climate change, and our planet's ecosystem is more fragile than ever. About 1,000 species of birds, or 1/10 of all the world's birds, are threatened. Many of them are near extinction, and that was made possible only with the help of science and technology. Because our world's economy is primarily powered by science and technology, you are always going to see stories of how science is making the world better. But that message has been poured through the filter of money and wealth, and so our society has thousands of little mechanisms to make STEM look great. However, no one ever considers the side effects of these great discoveries. Technology is the worst part of STEM because it is developed purely for short-term convenience and profit, and it completely ignores long-term consequences. Going back to Australia's CSIRO statement, if you think that you can shape the world by creating new technologies, you had better take some serious amount of time thinking about what you are doing, and you better have the guts to say no when you think that something will not improve the world. If you aren't doing these two things, the only thing that will improve by creating new technology is the size of your bank account. So what can we do? Keep in mind that I'm not advocating for the abandonment of science. Science may in fact be necessary to carry us and other life forms through the current ecological disaster. Certain fields, such as the study of plants and animals, are clearly useful for understanding how the world works and how we may mitigate our impact on the world. What I am advocating for is a new perspective on STEM research, and to this end I have made a list of 5 things that you can do if you're going into STEM research. Number 1, don't be deluded by the lie of STEM. Don't go into STEM thinking that it's a place that will encourage you to improve the world. 9 times out of 10, your work in STEM will be motivated more by short-term curiosity and fame if you're in science, or profit if you are in technology. Be aware that STEM is popular not because it is something that we can use to improve the human condition, but because there's money in it, and there's money in it only because it gives short-term gains at the expense of our common good. Number 2, find a way to make a difference. Of course, some fields like ecological understanding are exceptions, but 9 times out of 10, and especially in technology and private firms, your work will be more harmful than good. Thus, you will have to be a bit rebellious by thinking for yourself and using your own conclusions to make a real difference. Part of that difference is choosing where you want to work to do good, and part of that difference is saying no when you're asked to develop a technology that is clearly harmful, such as artificial intelligence. Number 3, use your knowledge with maturity. Science and technology is powerful, and once you have it, don't just use it because it will give you publications. Don't just use it because it will make you rich. Don't think that using it is ethical just because an ethical board tells you there is no problem. Use it only when you've given the impact of your results serious consideration, and not just for short-term gain, but for long-term stability of our planet. Number 4, teach your children. Today's schools and society is saturated with propaganda that STEM is some sort of savior for the world. In reality, it is far from that because no one is taught the ethics of science and technology. Thus, teach your children that knowledge, while attractive and sometimes useful, is also a potential path to our destruction. And number 5, don't look at this as a moral judgment. I myself simply went into mathematics because it was intellectually satisfying and cool, and I never gave any thought to its potential dangers for humanity, such as artificial intelligence that we are seeing today. We are all products of our evolutionary history, and we all have the instinct to explore and learn. We are curious. Yet, the next stage of humanity must be more than just these instincts. It must be the pursuit of knowledge tempered with the maturity to use it. Personally, I like science, yet on the other hand, I realize that most of what we do today is reckless. We need to reform the institutions of science, we need to reform how technology is developed, we need to reform STEM so that it actually considers the long-term consequences so that we can live on this planet harmoniously with plants and animals. There are many more species here than just humans, and we should start to act like it.